crap. Hello friends, I'd like to welcome you today to What's in Tegan's Storage Locker. It's the show that dares to ask the question, just what is in my storage locker? The answer today, well, it's comic books. I grab a fistful of comic books from somewhere that has been, in the storage locker. We look through them here for your entertainment. The storm rages outside, so I don't know if you can hear that. It's actually coming down fairly hard right now. And, he's completely discombobulated by hard rain. He doesn't quite know how to deal with it. But we threw the rattly ball around for, a good 5 minutes. So maybe he'll be sated for the moment. Let's start off today with an issue of Supergirl. From the early 90s. This is from the time immediately after the pages of the reign of the Superman. Superman was back. Superboy and Steel were established characters. Like, the plot had been resolved, and now even Supergirl, who was not, she didn't originate in that story, but she was prominent. She did a lot in that story, so she was rewarded with her own 4-issue limited series. Now, I'm going to point out here, both Superboy and Steel launched with ongoings. The Superboy series I followed pretty much through most of the run. It was a very good book. Almost every month it was worth reading. And Steel didn't last quite as long, but I don't know, Steel never, maybe if I went back, I feel differently. I think I bought the whole run out of affection for the character, but I don't really remember anything about it, to be honest with you. Maybe it's a gem to go back and rediscover, because it was written, or at least co-written, by the character's co-creator, Louise Simonson. But for the moment here, we're looking at this issue of Supergirl, of the mini-series that she got. And it would be, I think, a couple years, because this was, early 94. This was hitting stands, the series. So it was still a couple years, I think, between this and her ultimately getting a solo series, I think, tail end of 95, 96, I want to say, with, Peter David and Gary Frank in a completely different milieu, purposefully going in and upending just about everything about the character, because this was a weird status quo in hindsight. And this is the status quo, I really started to get into the Superman books with, and I like this character just fine. I don't think this character wasn't Supergirl. I think it was just a weird chain of events that led to her in a romantic relationship with Lex Luthor's clone. And he had the original Lex Luthor's brains, or how do you say that? He's in a clone body, brain. It's, one of those situations. Just, it's how he escaped death. And so he came back to life and just gaslit this poor girl for years. And in hindsight, we don't talk about that storyline very often. That's an interesting one. So this is coming out of that period. And a note here, this series, The Legends of the World's Finest, I actually have this in a box 2 feet from my foot. I bought this, I think I bought the whole dang thing in a pack at a convention in the late 90s, and I don't think I've ever read it. So we're going to read this on the channel at some point on the TikTok and the Instagram. I'm looking forward to it, because a while back we read a Walter Simonson written comic that it didn't end up being quite so good as I think it could have been, the Predator-Tarzan crossover, which no flies on how it looked. It just didn't really go anywhere. But working with Daniel Brereton on Batman and Superman, that has to at least look good. All right, so who's the creative team for this book here? It's Roger Stern, who was, I want to say, writing action at the time. And she was, as a supporting character, more or less in action, because even during the Triangle era, this doesn't have a triangle number because this is a spin-off. Spin-offs didn't get triangle numbers. But, you know, there's a Superman star on the cover to catch your eye, just in case you missed the connotation there. You know, this was the era where they were putting out a lot of Superman books. Superman was selling a lot of comic books. In 1994 and 1995, all through the end of the decade, he picked up a lot of readers. He picked up a huge new generation of readers. You cannot underestimate the fact that the character just became more popular as a result of, you know, all those stories in the early 90s. They were really popular stories, and they were so gimmicky, absolutely gimmicky, and yet they were able to get so much juice out of them. It's really kind of nuts. And I know people like to disparage that run. I'm not deaf to the entreaties. You know, it was a little bit of an insular period. I was watching a video the other day where someone just mentioned, it was a Casually Comics video, where the woman mentioned that the Triangle era was absolutely opaque from the outside looking in, if you hadn't been following it at the time. And I thought about it for about 20 seconds and realized, oh yeah, I still have all of these books that are organized in triangle number, because that's just how our minds work. They trained us to think that way for a decade, and now they don't do that anymore, and no one has tried doing that since. Yeah, maybe it was considered too much trouble, but it really it basically had you on the hook for a weekly comic book. And of course, you know, later on in the 2000s, they wouldn't retreat from the idea of a weekly comic book. They would just put it in the standalone 52 and then the Countdown, and Trinity, I think, was the one that came after. They haven't done one in a while. They could probably stand to do one in a while here. That seems like the kind of thing that could get, you know, at least a few headlines in this degraded age. That was almost a decade ago. That was a long time ago that 52 happened. People talk about that story like that. People talk about 52. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit off the track here. It's just funny how lionized that area is and how much people moaned when it was happening. People thought it was an absolute failure week in and week out. It was only afterwards that I think its reputation started to rise. And, you know, to a degree, that comes out of this period on the Superman books here, when they sort of proved, even towards the end of the 90s, when I think everyone involved was maybe a little bit more trying to be kind here, but there needed to be some creative turnover because they had it down to a machine. And for the last couple of years, it sort of maybe felt like it. And then it sort of took them a while to find another rhythm, and they never tried doing this again. Once they sort of broke free of the 90s Triangle era, they moved away from it. And like I say, then they codified it in the weekly series that they did for a while there. So, June Brigman. That's, you know, I've been sitting on this one. That's why we're looking at this comic book. June Brigman. If you don't know June Brigman, if you are not already scouring through the boxes looking for all the June Brigman books you can find, it's only because you haven't been paying attention, because let me tell you something. She is the real deal. I've never seen a bad comic book page from her. She's got a new comic book out, a new Power Pack book. It looks dynamite, I swear to you. And here, you want to know who's inking her? On this throwaway Supergirl 4-issue limited series that no one remembers. No one wants to remember this era of the character. They got June Brigman and Jackson Geis. Yeah. Look at that. Albert de Guzman doing the lettering. Glenn Whitmore on colors. All right. Now that I've, given my defense of the triangle era. It's how we were raised. It's how we were conditioned. We really liked the reign of the Superman. That was such a high. That really was. And that, I think, is a high that they've been racing to get back in a lot of ways for, years after that. I mean, look at this. This is, she's drawing a little bit more like this is a 90s comic book. She hasn't completely stayed static since Power Pack. You read some of the Power Pack, especially the early Power Pack stuff. It's kind of stiff, intentionally stiff. And then it sort of grew out of that. I think Jock Bogdanovich loosened the book up considerably. And, by the time you get to the 90s here, June Brigman is, totally adapted. This looks very much like a 90s comic book in terms of, the storytelling, the action sequences, how it reads, except for the fact that it's all more or less put together by someone who knows how to draw. So there's a little, a tiny bit of two people who know how to draw. So, there's always that cognitive dissonance that comes a little bit from seeing superior artists trying to figure out what works about manifestly inferior draftsmen. Because that is definitely, June Brigman, she's an impeccable draftsman. Absolutely impeccable. Pick up any comic from any era that she's done, or any of the other work outside of comics, and you will see just absolute impeccable drawing skills on display at every turn. I have to say I was really heartened by that Power Pack book, actually. Oh, there I go again. I'm trying. Technically, that's a callback, I guess. But I'm not over trying to be through with that. What was I saying? Yes. This is a very nicely colored comic book as well. I like these greens. This is pretty, I'm going to say, average. And I do not mean average in the pejorative, merely in the descriptive. They had a fairly decent talent pool to pull from. Another reason why those books looked as good as they did is they had a lot of people who had started at Marvel in the 80s. And, that's always sort of been the pattern for, at least since the 70s. You get someone for Superman who was at Marvel a few years ago. That's just how the nature works, for the most part. But they knew what they were doing. They knew how to make a comic that would look attractive, that would get picked up off the newsstand. Those Reign of Superman books, Death and Return Cycle, those were sort of a big performer in the twilight of the newsstand. Newsstands held on for a few years after that. It wasn't until the late 90s where, the rot really set in. So they're doing something, testing her powers. You see this just creepy dynamic with this version of Lex Luthor, who really is a blight on that whole period. It can only be so good. The Reign of the Superman is marred by the fact that this is the version of Lex Luthor in it. And deep down I'm right about that one. It's like the one imperfection. The one imperfection. What is otherwise generally a pretty sterling run of comics, I have to say. I'll go to the mat. I really loved reading that run of comics. And they were consistent enough. More or less, after that story ended, it pretty much kept going pretty good for a while there. And they refreshed creators a number of times. Barry Kitson did a good run on Adventures of Superman. Stuart Eminem, I want to say Stuart Eminem was also on Adventures, but see, there's lots of Dan Jurgens. If you like Dan Jurgens, it's pretty much the most Dan Jurgens you're going to find. And Roger Stern, of course, who really just never really settled in for another big tenure at Marvel like you think he could have. He worked here and there, but he was always one of those writers who worked best with long runs, which is why, at that period, for a character like Superman, it was perfect for his tendencies as a long-term plotter. Someone who liked to work with artists, too. Oh, I mean, this is they're giving us the backstory on what is admittedly kind of a complicated iteration of this character, because Superman was the only person from Krypton. So to get around that, first it started with an alternate universe, and this was the version of Supergirl from that alternate universe, who was really this artificial protoplasmic entity who could take any shape she wanted in theory, but she decided she wanted to be Superman's cousin. And she spent some time with the Kents as well. So she was part of the Superman family during this period. But I also can't remember when the last time this character was seen or even mentioned. I don't know, possibly she has been. A lot of the 90s stalwarts have come back and forth in popularity. But I don't think Matrix ever... that's another thing. The other name, the logical name that you would give this character is Matrix. So, all right, there's another strike against her that wasn't really coming to my head, but that's more or less what the entity was called, who wanted to be Supergirl. And he's talking about when he found her as a protoplasmic state, and they're just all helping her believe that she's really Supergirl, I guess, which, in hindsight... It was what we were given. It was a very 80s Marvel development. Clay Fighter. Man, people must have loved these because they made a lot of them. And then it wasn't, I don't think it was a spinoff, but this was also the time when they did that Celebrity Deathmatch, which I always found the most unwatchable thing. I will watch the worst animation. I just like having animation on. I've watched terrible Seth MacFarlane cartoons just to have something on in the background. And I drew the line at Celebrity Deathmatch. So guess what I find out one day is one of my mother's favorite shows. Can't get enough of it. My goodness. Anyway. So, yes, back to our other clay fighter here. See, here she is hanging out with Ma and Pa Kent, who were, I guess they were having an exercise subplot or something. I don't know. Oh, there's my boy. There's Jean-Paul Vallée in his armor. I don't really like him that much. I like that armor. They never really brought back that armor for anything. You'd think at some point they would give that armor to another character, but they never did. Huh. Interesting. Because when they spun Azrael back out, they just had him dressed like Azrael again. Because it was a pretty decent costume, but it was also very difficult to draw, I think. This was kind of far out, and they just sort of buried it. There's something they can bring back. All right, that. Bruce has never worn that armor. What if he had a curse where he had to wear that armor? Oh, man. There you go. There you go. That's $1 million idea right there. They could probably get one of those DC Animated Universe videos out of that story. But anyway, I'm just babbling here. Because, this is also kind of square in the sense that we're checking in with Ma and Pa Kent for three pages, which, if you're reading Superman, this is kind of part of the bargain. So you go with it. It's reassuring. They're a reassuring presence that you didn't have in the Silver Age. Superman was an orphan. You never got to see, unless, it was a imaginary story or a time travel story. You didn't get to see Superman just having a relationship with his parents. That's something that the 90s, and John Byrne actually, gave back to the character that people don't usually complain about. And of course, is Pa Kent still dead? 2000s, man. Dropping like flies. That's a very nice looking page. Hats off to the colorist for that one. Lex Luthor with a beard talking to a woman on a view screen. It's kind of a merciless page in the script right there. And we're doing some establishing. We're seeing that Lex is up to some Lex stuff. That's just what he's gonna do. That's what he's all about. And what is? Oh yeah, he's cloning more Supergirls. Is this the story where she realizes that he's a no good Fink? Because she did figure it out at some point. I think maybe this is. Did she go through a brief dark Supergirl arc or something? I don't remember. Like I say, it was not a plot line that a lot of people go out of their way to reference anymore. The character did have her fans. Now, the funny thing is that those, by power of transmutation, many of those fans ended up being Peter David fans, which is how he was able to launch something that was not in any way, I think, supposed to be a Supergirl spinoff, but was nevertheless inextricably fixed in some people's minds as a Supergirl spinoff, Fallen Angel. So, that's another reason. This character had a fairly long run until the early 2000s. And then they realized, well, Superman's cousin is maybe a little bit easier for the Underoos crowd. And to be fair, it is. Now, interestingly enough, when they brought back, quote-unquote, the real Supergirl, they got Michael Turner to draw her. There's a video, me and Claire talk about those comic books. We may even talk about those comic books again someday, because we really only skimmed the surface. Michael Turner drew them, and they're very weird for completely different reasons. Poor Supergirl. And you can't say that. I think that the problem is that they killed her real good. Crisis on Infinite Earths, number 7, is one of the most heartbreaking stories ever. People mourned for her, and then they couldn't bring that character back, so until they decided they could bring her back, and even after then, it's the same problem Barry Allen has. They killed him too good. That story was beloved, and people loved the person who came after enough that they just sort of accepted it as the way things were. And then it was a problem when another crowd came into prominence and decided, no, well, we're going to go back to Barry and Hal. Well, I thought we already had a referendum on Barry and Hal. And look, I'm not going to argue necessarily for a lot of what was in those books prior to, the return of those respective characters. But there had to have been a better way. There had to have been a better way than the way they did it. All right, and speak of the devil here, the DC Universe page, which that never really put as much work, quite as much work into as the Bullpen Bulletins page, then or now. It's just, those weird quirks between the two companies. This is the Aquaman reboot that they got Peter David for. I want to say the second Aquaman reboot they got Peter David for. I want to say. And I was on board for that. I thought it was, the art was pretty decent throughout. Jim Califor had a run with the Hook Aquaman that looked pretty decent. And I like Peter David enough that month to month, I would tune in for the most part. I was tuning out a Guy Gardner. It wasn't a book I ever bought regularly, but when I checked in, it was usually only because they got Phil Jimenez to draw an issue, because this guy on his own just wasn't doing it for me. Oh, and this is the month of Green Lantern 48 to 50, Emerald Twilight, where they realized, what they had planned for this guy originally. Oh, man. What they had planned for this guy originally in Green Lantern 50, I remember reading the preview for it. And I was reading Green Lantern at the time, so the story made sense to me. It's like, oh, they're doing this thing with, it was the Controllers and the Zamorans having some sort of spat in the spotlight, in the spotlight for issue 50. After the reign of the Superman, after they broke Batman's back, they pulled the brakes on that. And they decided, let's just get rid of this Hal guy here. Huh? And I was on board. I've said in the past, I was on board for that Green Lantern. I was frustrated. I didn't really care for the writing on it. It looked really sweet, thanks to Darryl Banks. That's why I bought it. This is what I was talking about earlier, John Bogdanovich. He co-created the character along with Louise Simonson. So they were writing it with Chris Batista, who, yeah, I remember liking his work at the time. What happened to him? Huh. Yeah, very interesting. Very, very, very readable style. I haven't thought about him in forever. Maybe I'll pull some of his out. I'm talking myself into being more interested in looking at one of those issues of Steel. So, speaking of Steel, kick some liquid metal butt. I want to say that I rented the T2 game. It was pretty fun for a side-scroller. If I rented it, I probably only got past the first couple of levels. It was rare for me to enjoy something enough to want to save up money to finish it at home. I've still only finished the first half of the Super Nintendo Link, the first one. I just took it back because I'd had it for like a week and I didn't feel like paying anymore. I thought I'd get it again at some point, and I never ended up doing it. So I'm still, and it's the furthest I ever got in any Zelda game, because when I got Zelda 64, that was the last time I ever tried to play any of those type of video games, because it was humiliating. It was humiliating. I tried for a week to get past the tree. And then I put it in a carrying case and I took it to a party because, of course, the WWE game was remarkably popular. Take it to a party. And then I asked someone else, hey, do you play this game? Like, yeah, I got it at home. Do you know how to get past the tree? So they play and they get past the tree in like 15 seconds. And it was so humiliating. I've never, ever touched any of those games again. Not going to do it. Life's too short. Oh, well. What do we got here? How about Tales to Astonish, featuring the Hulk, Hank Pym, and the Wasp? I was just looking through the pile here, wondering what we should look at next. I picked this up, which I'd sort of been looking at a couple times as a possible candidate for the show. So then I just picked it up to flip to see who did it. Now, Peter David. Well, there you go. Speak of the devil and he will appear. He wrote a lot of comic books in the 1990s. And, for my sins, I bought them. I bought a lot of what he did. I never touched Soul Searchers and Company. I never touched that. In hindsight, that's maybe the one I would have enjoyed more, because that had early Amanda Connor artwork on it. But this was part of a... all right. To put it as frankly as possible, the success of Marvel's blindsided everyone in the entire industry. It was not supposed to be a successful comic book. It was not even supposed to make its money back. Everyone involved knew that it was a labor of love that no one would buy. Maybe they'd win a couple awards, maybe they'd get a good mark in one of the fan publications or something, but it wasn't the type of book that was ever supposed to be a success. And everyone involved knew that going in, except for the fact where it became such a massive success, it completely rewired part of the brain of the comics industry. And the weird thing, you go back and look and you see that first issue of Marvels, it shipped in 1993. It was a member of the class of 1993, right at the tail end of the year of the implosion. That is a trip to me. That, I can't get over that. That just goes to show you how fast everything was happening then. Because that came out, and I knew it was going to be awesome, because I read Marvel Age. Marvel Age made a big deal of it. Do you know how many people were just sitting around reading Marvel Age at the time? Obviously not very many, because no one was paying any attention to this book. And I remember the first time it was out, when I went to a comic book store, both the first and the second issue were still on the stands. And even though I think they were $6, and I only had like $15, so that meant only 3 comic books. That's how much I wanted them, because I read those, every issue of that series. I absorbed that thing down to the pore. I loved it. And the thing is, I was not the only one. The book was at the top of the Wizard charts the next month. It blew my mind to see something that actually was good, that I appreciated. I was not that old, but I understood, wait a minute, Alex Ross, this is on a different level altogether. And it was, just in terms of pure ability. Undisputable. No one's going to deny that. One of the best draftsmen in the history of the medium. It doesn't even bear saying. And he chooses to be a painter. So no one knew what to do with that. No one in the industry had any idea. Okay, well, this is obviously a once-in-a-generation success by once-in-a-generation talents, both Alex Ross and Kurt Busiek. How do we follow that one up? And to be fair, they figured out that the way to do that was to give both of those men more work as quickly as they could. But there was the small matter of the fact that they'd also proven that painted comics could be a success, that they could be worth the trouble, that they weren't just sort of, well, it's not that painted comics didn't exist before 1993, because they most certainly did. Many beautiful painted comics exist before 1993. Alex Ross didn't invent the medium. But Bill Sienkiewicz wasn't doing monthly comic books, or at least wasn't penciling monthly comic books when Wizard was pushing his work, and Wizard decided they were really going to push Alex Ross, because Alex Ross was everything the magazine wanted. In the most literal way, the staff at Wizard were actually sometimes openly antagonistic in the editorial pages, and occasionally even in the reviews, of some of the material that they also boosted financially. More than is credited, certainly. Probably, not something that people would, not the first thing that people would think about that era. And yet, there was definitely a strong contingent of people at all the fan press, Wizard and the magazines that came after, and the magazines that came before. Comics Journal did a 2-part interview with Alex Ross in 1999. Excellent interview. Excellent interview. Really raised my estimation of the man, that he was able to meet the interview on those terms. Maybe it wasn't that great of an interview in hindsight, but I thought it was rather cracking. It wasn't antagonistic, really. Maybe that's why people don't talk about it. So the idea was, well, let's just do some painted comics. And the funny thing is some of these books are actually really nice. You get early work by artists who either came to prominence immediately after or rose in the wake of Alex Ross. Because Alex Ross proved the concept. Like, oh yeah, you can have painted comics. They make sense. They make financial sense. If they're good enough, if they're popular enough, you can do them as prestige projects. And people had sort of known that for a while, I guess, but it takes a while to prove the point, because there were a lot of nice painted comics in the early 90s that no one bought. Epic put out the earliest Alex Ross story in the Open Space anthology. It was very nice, his first comics work, fully painted, as were many of their books at the time. No one was buying them. So you needed the combination of the art, being able to reproduce painted art, being able to produce painted art to begin with, in a cost-effective way to put in a comic book. And this is Peter David with John Estes. who should, I don't know, I'm gauging whether or not. Maybe you know who John Estes is. If you don't, oh, look who John Estes is. Richard Starking's lettering. So, that looks to be like someone is tied in the center of the earth. Oh, it's the old Loki trap, which doesn't usually show up as often in the Marvel comics, where he's chained in the center of the earth with the snake dropping venom on him. Oh, that's very nice. Very nice. Definitely, you can see the thumbprint of Sienkiewicz on every artist to work, you know, in painted comics, certainly in Alex Ross. But yeah, it's got an interesting color sense. It's not, for the time, like this seems like if this comic had come out 10 years after this would be a very unexceptional palette. But this is 1990, I want to say 1995. 1994, December 1994. So a year. This was commissioned in the year after they got those first sales numbers back from Marvel's. So, you know, it's a very, wow, look at this. This is just very nice looking. You know, it does. It's got a lot of that late 80s Sienkiewicz color. Oh, but this guy also knows how to draw too. So, well, sometimes with the painters, you find them doing some wonky drawing occasionally. In the early stuff, that's a... but they're just sort of figuring it out. This seems very much like something that... very much like something you would have seen in an epic comic. There we go again. The Shadowline saga, that had a lot of far out work in it. People never talk about that. That had a lot of interesting art in it. I haven't even seen a lot of that stuff. Ooh, look at this. Look at this. Is that airbrush? That is not, and you know, working, you got Peter David, so it's working with Thor mythos stuff knowledgeably. He used Asgard in Hulk a few times, I think. Here's Loki up to some tricks, which is kind of what Loki does. And so the gimmick here, because they were going for the logic that the older readers who either remembered or just appreciated and had a longer sense of the company's history, who wanted to see more of the overtures towards that history, like as in Marvel's, they made this line of, I think there were 3 of them, and they were based around the early team-up books. So that's why you have the Hulk and Hank Pym and the Wasp, because that was the first incarnation of Tales to Astonish. And they had one that Tales of Suspense, that was Iron Man and Captain America. And the third was Journey into Mystery with Dr. Oh, come on. And I do not, for the life of me, remember who they got to paint the other ones. But they got painters, I think, painters with names you'd recognize even, to work with the top shelf writers. I want to say James Robinson wrote one. That would have been the time when getting him would have been a real catch. I want to say he wrote one of those. I can't remember who wrote the third. But they were, I think I got them all. I want to say, not to be corny, I think I got them all for Christmas one year. Because this was, my mom liked looking at the art, so she got stuff that looked good to her. And she would have loved these, looking through these. Yeah, I had to get it from somewhere. So they're fighting some. Is that Belasco? I'm not even bothering. It's these two, and when he's in the jumpsuit, I notice I haven't even mentioned anything about the fashion here. She's dressed in one of her Silver Age costumes for some reason that would probably make sense if I were reading. And at some point, the Hulk has to show up. And there we go. There's our man. Peter David was, of course, still writing the Hulk at this point. He was Mr. Hulk in the popular imagination. At that point, much to Marvel's chagrin. But if you wanted to get, he was perfectly happy to do plenty of side projects with the character. Is this? Oh, okay. Oh, there you go. There you go. And so this is the version of the Hulk that was current then in 1994, who was still, for the moment, intelligent, which was, the Hulk I liked growing up. And it's not really that unusual version of the Hulk, all things considered. He's been smart plenty of times, or at least not mentally impaired, as he often is, especially in the public imagination. But people just don't seem to like that version of the character. And that's the version I grew up with. So, go figure. Because both the Bill Mantlo run, which I adore, I've spoken about that run in the past. I spoke about that run like 2 episodes ago, I think. What are you doing? Oh, speaking of the Hulk. Ow. Maybe I need to go do something about him. Where were we? Okay, there we go. Well, I went and threw the rattly ball around with him for a couple of minutes, and then he got disinterested in it, so what am I supposed to do when he gets bored with playing with me? It's not my fault. I'm there in good faith. He gets bored, and then 30 seconds later, he gets on board again. Well, I can't live my life around these whims. This is the show that brings you face to face with the realities of filming anywhere near a cat. Very nice work here. I have no idea what's going on. It's some sort of... these stories happen sometimes because, Thor's world is huge. So lots of different heroes have had adventures with Asgardian stuff and with Loki that have nothing to do with him. It's a huge part of the Marvel Universe. So, he was... I mentioned that it was actually not that well-received revelation, one of the longest-running subplots in his book for like 4 years. The resolution turned out to be some Asgard stuff, and people hate it. I didn't care for it. And I will eat up anything with a spoon if it's got Gary Frank drawing it with Cam Smith. But I just didn't care for how that story was resolved, and I wasn't the only one. It took the wind out of the sails of that era of the character, I think. But then they got Liam Sharp for a few issues. Those are some very dynamite-looking issues. Hulk got good artists. Hulk sold well enough that Hulk was justified in getting good artists. It had Todd McFarlane on it. So they're just... Oh, she's got a different costume. Oh, so maybe that was maybe she's changing between scenes. That would make sense. Oh, so they're fighting. Oh, some good classic goblins with axes. I always love seeing those show up. Good proper stuff. And there's a zebra woman and a wolf. Fenris is eating people. And no, they're throwing fire around, and things are getting rather intense. And Oh, so he just so they were small. I didn't get that they're supposed to be small. I wasn't paying that close of attention again. That's cool. You gotta admit, I wasn't expecting anything that cool. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, wow, look at this. I have no idea what's going on here, but this looks fantastic. Bully for you, John Estes, was that it? Yeah, John Estes. You strong finish. Wow. Wow, it's kind of, you traveled. We have gone on a journey with you, my friend. My goodness, and then by the end you get to this? Man, this guy's getting better as we watch. This is fantastic. Like either that or he drew the second part first, because the second part is much stronger than the first. But it's also different. It's almost like he switched up technique or something halfway between. Maybe he did. It's just a nice looking comic all around any way you slice it. And this was another thing that I'm like, wait a minute, Marvel's had that cool plastic cover. So all these books got to have the cool plastic cover. And to be fair, the cool plastic cover worked pretty well with both the art for the book, giving you the shot like that, but also comic books stay in better shape that way. All right, and now for something completely different. Radioactive Man number 88. Number 88? Yes, number 88. In reality, it was the second issue of the Radioactive Man series, the unique gimmick of which was each issue took place in a different period in comics history, because the conceit was this was Bart Simpson's favorite comic book character, so he would have been published through all of the... so this is Silver Age, so go check on the cover. And so what you have in each of these issues is a loving homage slash recreation slash parody slash commentary on various eras of comic book history. And so this is Steve Vance, Bill Morrison, Cindy Vance was also co-plotting and doing colors. They did this, I think that's the team through the whole series. Bill Morrison is the guy I recommend if you're going to look for any one creator associated with Bongo Comics, Bill Morrison's the one you want. If you want two, then you go for Bill Morrison and Steve Vance. After that, I don't know, I'd maybe have to go back and check, because I know a number of good artists work for the company, but those are the ones who started at the company, who more or less built the house style, so to speak, which was, it seems obvious to say, like, oh, it's just draw like The Simpsons. Well, not very many people have drawn comic books about The Simpsons until 1994. The first was in 1993, and then they started the company the year after. And this is the team, these are the people who figured out how to make that whole thing work in print. And part of that was coming in with what was, in all frankness, kind of an inside baseball move. We're going to launch with like straight up, like rather wonkish, geek humor. This was the same summer as 1969. And I remember buying this at the same time as 1969 and thinking, the funny thing is that the Simpsons spinoff actually seems to have a little bit more life to it. I'm dead serious. Dead serious. That's how highly esteemed. And people still love these books. Everyone who was buying the books remembers. There's a lot of love put into this line, at least at the beginning, especially this book. And you see it's just so completely made by people who are absolutely enamored with the source material. I mean, if you want to make a good impression in an industry, this is the type of book you publish out of the gate, because you have basically, blank check to start with anything. People want Simpsons comics. What are you going to start with? Well, let's do something. Let's do something really kind of insular in terms of scope, but really deep in terms of, I mean, look at this. This is very, like, panel to panel. This is early 60s Ditko and Kirby. Go back and look and see that the panel to panel, the storytelling was, they really look closely at some of those stories because they read within the Simpsons house style. Keep in mind, they're doing this stylistic homage to multiple different things from the early 1960s, while also making sure to draw like the Simpsons the whole time. That right there, that is interesting to me. Oh, there's your Ditko. Boom. Same composition, everything. And you know, it still gets juice after all this time. Just this setup. Guy's stuck under machinery, can't get out. He's got to push it up. He's got to do something. It keeps you turning the page is what it does. So we get Fall Out Boy's origin. I don't know the rock band well enough to make a joke. I have to say, I noped out of that the first time it ever crossed my trellis. So, I mean, look at this. This is a little bit of lots of there's a radioactive spider. Bye-bye, bug. He landed on that goofy-looking bookworm and bit him. See, it was funny in 1993. It was hilarious. 1994, yeah, it was hilarious in 1994. The final slugfest. And this is your guy. He lives this Clark Kent type life, except he always has to wear a hat because he's got a lightning bolt stuck in his head. It's a very, Simpsons premise for a comic book. Oh, look at that straight, and the way that, even down to the way the fingers are being drawn with the inking lines. My goodness. So they're fighting this monster, and then they come up with some Silver Age. Oh, they put a sign that says, "Warning, underground monster, do not disturb." Oh, and there's your classic panel of the hero separating him from his love interest. And next issue, which 216, Jeepers, my sidekick Fall Out Boy is a dirty hippie. And obviously you see the spooferino there. A brain-blasting bongo filler page. Matt Groening's signature was still on, I believe, still on everything to this day, right? With Bill Morrison's signature under it. But you see, that's just, unless you know how to draw really well, to pull off that stylistic homage within, like, a corporate house style for a television show. Oh, and this was the first, and here is talking about the Los Angeles earthquake on January 17th, I guess, 1994. Reporting on the death of Jack Kirby. Various letters, including, they always put because young kids were reading this comic. It was pitched as a kid's comic, so they got to print it. Fantastic. The greatest, you gotta love it. Oh, Joey Marchese. Used to see his name a lot. And then you'd see these, the only time you'd ever see weird crossovers is they would just straight up, always print stuff with other copyrighted characters. And you see it in the letters page for all the Image books that published fan art too, like Radioactive Man interacting with Ren and Stimpy. If it's fan art, you can print it. Oh, and here's an ad for the first season, I guess, of the Itchy and Scratchy show. 3 all-new episodes this season. Saturday morning at 5:30, right after the Farmer Report on UHF Channel 91. Do kids today know what the Farm Report was? I remember waiting through the Farm Report. I'm that old. All right, we only made it through 3. I'm sorry, folks. Well, there were 3 nice-looking comics. None of them were X-Men or Batman or Spider-Man, so this video will probably do horribly, but, you know, that's life. So, check out the Patreon. I got a free tier where you can sign up and get any of my mailings from here on out. There's also a free ebook up there, 20,000 words of my recent music writing. Free for download if you sign up for the free tier of the Patreon. I also want to tell you about an article I have up now at the Comics Journal website, tcg.com, about Batman Year One. I'm very proud of it. I think it came out pretty well. It should be up now by the time you're hearing this, tcg.com. I got a podcast with Claire Napier, Udder Madness. We talk about Top Cow Comics, Mark Silvestri, Michael Turner, Witchblade, Darkness, all that fun stuff. We have a Patreon, we have a Spotify, we have SoundCloud, and we're even on YouTube. I just put up the annotations for the 5th show where we talk about the darkness. And it should be just a click away here on YouTube. And I also want you to check out my daily comic book review videos on TikTok and Instagram. Same videos on both platforms. Some people have Instagram, some people have TikTok, some people can't stand TikTok. I understand. I don't necessarily use it a lot, but I cherish all the viewers I have on the platform. What else is there? You know, maybe that's enough for the time being. Have a wonderful day. Take care of yourself. Take care of the world. Take care of small children and animals. Just have a pleasant day.